Hey there, everyone. I am Lailani, and I want to thank you all for joining me on my channel, The Magical Solution. Really excited tonight because I picked up this amazing book recently. Actually, not recently, I've had it for a little while. And I have to say, this is a really amazing book. This is a book that I feel everyone should have in their library. And so, of course, I reached out to the publishing company to say, I want to talk to this person. I want to know what is going on with this person. Why did they, come up with this concept? Can we dive deeper into it? And I was honored to be told yes. So tonight, you and I are going to get an opportunity to speak to Nicholas Pearson, the author of Flower Essences from the Witch's Garden, Plant Spirits in Magical Herbalism. But before we bring him on, let's get to know him a little bit. So, Nicholas Pearson is an award-winning author and Reiki teacher. He has been immersed in all aspects of the mineral kingdom for nearly 3 decades. He began teaching workshops in high school, later studying mineral science at Stetson University and Gillespie Museum while pursuing a degree in music. Nicholas began his Reiki journey in 2006 and has trained in traditional styles of Japanese Reiki, including Usui Reiki Ryoho. Hopefully I said that right. As well as traditional and non-traditional forms of Western Reiki, like Usui Reiki Ryoho, Tibetan Reiki. Nicholas strives to offer Reiki training practices and sessions and other events that unite practitioners of all lineage by helping us understand how and where Reiki developed and where it can take us. Nicholas is also certified as a medical Reiki master and an animal Reiki practitioner and serves on the board of directors of Shelter Animal Reiki Association. He formerly served as board member of the National Reiki and Healthcare Certification Initiative and is a member of the International Association of Reiki Professionals. His seminal work, Reiki book, Foundations of the Reiki Ryoho, I'm going to say this right eventually, a manual of Shoden and Okuden, is available in English and Italian. He also offers seminars on crystal healing, Reiki, and of course, the flower essences therapy online and around the world. He is the author of 8 books, including Crystal Basics and the Foundations of Reiki Ryoho, and he lives in Orlando, Florida, USA. So without further ado, let's bring him on. Let's talk to him. Hey there.
Hello, hello.
You have an extensive background, especially in Reiki. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so, before I ask you about this book, I need to know, because I've studied Reiki as well. So I need to know, was a huge influence on you also branching out into crystal medicine and flower essences and all these other various subjects? Was that heavily influenced by the Reiki as well, or did you find it the other way around, or was it just all like common ground?
I've been a Reiki practitioner since 2006, and that's always kind of been the foundation of like my core daily practice. But I allow my Reiki practice to be a Reiki practice. I've been collecting crystals for almost 25 years now. So actually longer than that, I think closer to like 27, 28 years now. So that's been going on way, way longer. And I'd say that kind of the healing arts in general are one of the things that really speak to me. So I've always been on the lookout for other ways that I can kind of broaden my horizons and add new tools to my toolbox. So that way I can better serve others. So that's why I've branched out to include things like gem therapy and crystal healing and flower essence therapy, in addition to Reiki.
I agree. I agree in terms of, if you're on the path of being a healer, it's just so important to just stay on the student route of just learning as much as you can wherever you can and adopting as much information of different forms and modalities of healing so that you can be a better healer and be a better service to your community. And I have to say, you have amazing genes, because for you to say 27 years of doing anything, by looking at you, I'd be like, what?
Well, there's the witchcraft, right?
Right? The glamour is we do it. So, first of all, thank you so much for saying yes to coming onto my show. I know you're feeling a little under the weather today, and I want you to just relax and, don't feel pressured to speak or anything like that if you're not feeling too well. Um, but I really am so honored that you're on the show, because as I went through this book, I was saying to myself, this person is just so in tuned with how these essences speak. Like you went into not only like correspondences, but like you went into ritual, you went into um the different ways in which you can incorporate this into life, medicine, health, practice, like all of it. And I just, even like astrological signs and alchemy, the alchemy part, I definitely want to like pick your brain out about. But before we begin on all this wonderful stuff, what inspired you to do this to begin with? And what was your favorite part about going through this book and making this book?
Well, thank you for all that. I really enjoy flower essences because they're an extraordinarily gentle therapy. Unlike most other things that we can do with plants, we're not actually ingesting any plant matter when we make an essence via the traditional method and use it in our healing practice. So that means that we don't have to know chemistry and how we'll interact with medicine and all sorts of other things. It means that what we're essentially doing is co-creating. We are partnering with the consciousness, the indwelling spirit, the deva, we might call it, of the plant itself. And it was the spring of 2020 when I was working on this, and it was just as the weirdness of the world was beginning to roll out. So
Mm.
none of us knew how long it was going to last, or that it would still be going on while we have this conversation more than 2 years later. But suffice it to say that I ended up with slightly more spare time on my hand than normal, and I mean only ever so slightly. When the rest of my county shut down, I was still going to work. They were slightly limited hours, but I was in between other publishing projects. I just released another book, so that kind of freed up my energy, and it was one of those great aha moments. I have loved making flower essences. I've loved working with other systems. They've been a really big boon to my own spiritual and emotional well-being. But I'd never really found a guide that taught you how to do more than just make an essence and take it in the therapeutic context. But I've
Mm.
known a lot of witchy and occulty people who've started using essences outside of the traditional ways. So I thought it was time that we put a manual together that drew not just from the therapeutic praxis, but also kind of bridged the gap into the magical.
It's a must have. It's a must have in the library. Now, I don't know if I ever told you this, but my business name, The Magical Solution, very much stems from the fact that I am an absolute, and not to toot my own horn, but I am a wizard when it comes to making my oils and making my sacred waters and hydrosols and all that good stuff. And so, when I got a hold of your book, one of the first things that came to my mind was, I want to ask him the difference. What is the difference between an essence versus a hydrosol versus an essential oil versus a tincture? Like, there's so many words, there's so much vocabulary in It Is What We Do. Can you help sort of break that down a little bit for the newcomer that's just approaching this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really great question. It's always nice to start here because um, when we say something like flower essence, it sounds so similar to a lot of other things that it doesn't really have much relationship to. So, flower essences are defined as really dilute, energetic solutions where we kind of capture the energy, or we'll say the soul qualities of a flower or other botanical. And then we'll preserve that with brandy or apple cider vinegar or something else that's comparable, and dilute that, and use the end product as a kind of tuning fork for the emotional body.
Mm.
It's going to be different than like a hydrosol, which is usually steam distilled. Those will have the actual aroma of the botanicals in there. The only aroma you're going to get from a flower essence is from whatever preservative that you use. Very, very rarely, if you make a flower essence from a really aromatic flower, the mother tincture, that first infusion will have a faint aroma. I've got a couple in my toolbox that do, but by the time you dilute them for use, no aromatic quality at all.
Mm.
If we look at something like an essential oil, which also sounds pretty darn similar, flower essence, essential oil, those are either going to be steam distilled or solvent extracted, and they are highly concentrated. So it's the exact opposite end of the spectrum from flower essences. This is a really potent dose of phytochemicals, whereas there's like no chemical nature to a flower essence whatsoever. And then when we start to look at other things like homeopathy and classical tinctures and infusions and things, again, all of these are derived from the chemical nature of the plant versus the vibrational nature, which is what we work with in flower essence therapy.
So speaking of that, I already know the argument that we're going to have with a lot of herbalist elitists out there, right? We're going to have the argument of, well, if the botanical chemical aspect of the plant is technically not in the thing, then what the heck is it doing? Because this, woohoo, wishy-washy, energetic vibration, feeling of a spirit, like, how is that going to help in any therapeutic way? And I want to shut these elitists down because I feel like this is definitely something, it has, I've seen it work. I've seen people use essences before and it works. How?
Well, there's the $1,000,000 question. So,
Right?
I actually welcome these kinds of conversations. I love sitting down with people who are maybe more clinically minded or more skeptically minded, because evidence is the name of the game in anything that we do, whether it is our spiritual and magical practice. Like if magic didn't work, we wouldn't keep doing it. And I am not a formal scientist. I never ended up with a degree, well, in anything, but certainly not in hard science. But I have a really deep appreciation for the scientific method. So what we have to do is make observations, come up with some idea that we want to test, design a way to do so, and then collect data, which is just observing more things. So ultimately, it all comes down to like, what can we observe? And that's what the scientific method is trying to help us do. Observe more intelligently, more pointedly, and with the hopes of gaining enough data that we can change something, right?
Yeah.
So what I can tell you is that there have been really good double and single blind clinical studies involving flower essence therapy in several parts of the world that have all shown us that flower essences work. Now, some tests are designed better than others. One of the things that makes flower essence therapy really unique is that because it's a psycho-spiritual kind of thing, it's really meant to be tailored to the individual. So, if we have a group of 45 people and we give them all the same 4 essences out of a system like the batch flowers, which might have 38, those 30 people might not all benefit from the same 4 essences. So we have to like really learn how to tailor things appropriately. And when we do, time and time again, the clinical data shows us that essences work. Now, the one thing the clinical data fails to do is define what the mechanism is. So it's an effect in search of a cause, which is a thing that happens a lot in science, surprisingly. We might call it the placebo effect, but if it were just that, then those double-blind studies that also have placebos in them wouldn't show repeatedly, like they do, that flower essences outperform placebos in every single instance. So what is there? We have theories, and that's the best that we can do. It is probable that somehow the nature of water, which has memory, which is observable and repeatable and pretty well understood, is holding on to some electromagnetic imprint from the botanicals that are placed in it in that initial infusion. And when we add a preservative, not only are we keeping out the fuzzy stuff that might grow in there, mold and mildew and stuff, we're also doing something that might enable the water to hold on to or maintain that electromagnetic charge. It's probably somewhere in like the picowatt level. So it's like tiny, 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 tiny amounts of energy that are suspended in that water that determine the shape of those bonds. And because we're mostly water, it's very easy to transmit that pattern or that information from the essence to us. So we consider them to be information therapies because it is not the chemical substance, but it is the information contained in the structure of that substance that's actually affecting healing. And that's how I would talk about it from someone who wants to come from that clinical perspective. And then, if someone has a more spiritual understanding of things, I myself am an occultist, a witch, an animist at heart. So it's real easy to have the conversation about how essentially what we're doing with flower essences is we are connecting to that plant spirit, like indigenous people have since the dawn of time, and
Yes.
allowing the wisdom of that spirit to come through, to leave its mark on that water, to create a kind of potion or sacred elixir. And then we use the gifts of that plant spirit for healing. And if we look at a lot of indigenous herbal medicine, not all of it, but there's certainly a good chunk of it that works from a spiritual mechanism, and not necessarily because of the phytochemicals of the plant. I have seen a lot of different remedies that are prepared from very, very weak infusions. In fact, probably little to no chemical nature involved at all, that can affect extraordinary healing in these indigenous practices. So I think that although modern flower essence therapy is the invention of a Western European man in the early 20th century, it certainly sits in a continuum of herbal practices that stretch back into, this near universal nature of partnering with the spirits of nature.
Seriously. Seriously, you broke that down absolutely perfectly. I was having a conversation with a dear friend of mine recently, and I spoke about a meditation that I had when I was a child. And this is a meditation that many of my followers already know about. And this meditation was with regards to an ancestor who was trying to inform me of a particular medicine that is utilized in Puerto Rico. And this particular medicine is almost considered like the fountain of youth. And it is a special water that comes from a special place. I can't give that information out. And then they would take a flower and float it on the top and sit it out in the sun for a few. And then you have to then take it and then drink it. And this was all through a meditation that was nonverbal. So I had no idea what she was trying to teach until much later in life. So now to hear this almost in a very scientific way is so validating for someone like myself. So I really hope that, people who are watching right now, as crazy as our dreams might be, as our meditations might be, as wacky as the communications might be between us and our spirits, these symbols that they give us, if they're showing us, putting a flower in a cup and pouring this and pouring, it may look crazy to you. It may not make any sense, but there is a ancient wisdom there that we should really pay attention to. And having people like you who come in and say, yeah, but there's also much more to it. Let me explain. Is just so validating. It's so awesome. You mentioned that it's also that it's psycho-spiritual in terms of its healing. So let's talk about today. Like, let's talk about the world that we're in right now. We've got a rogue government that is taking control and hijacking everything and screwing everything up. We've got climate change and forests and animals going extinct. We have people fighting against each other, man against woman, black against white. We just everything is happening right now, and it feels hopeless. And in a situation where you as a healer come in with all of your tools, specifically the flower essences, how would you go about quote unquote diagnosing or working with a community that is feeling so traumatized, overwhelmed, overworked, and in survival mode?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a loaded question. And like you said, it's very specific to each person. So I'm just curious, like if someone were to come to you and just be like, I am all of these things, how would you approach a situation like that?
I mean, first and foremost, I think the art of any healer is the art of holding space.
Oh, for sure.
So, being an engaged listener and like being there to show up for someone, whatever the outcome is, whatever actions are taken after that, you've probably done a lot more than they've gotten out of their average chance to unburden. So,
Yeah.
that's what I try to do first and foremost. In really we'll say urgent or crisis modes, I would turn someone to a combination remedy, something like rescue remedy, sometimes called 5-flower formula, which is the standard mix of 5 of Dr. Batch's flowers that are used for shock and trauma. And it's a very urgent kind of thing. But other flower essence makers have their own versions of it. So whether you work with like the Australian bush flower essences or the Alaskan essences, they've got their own versions of their own kind of like crisis formulas, and that's a great place to get started. So if you're listening and you're in that state of shock or trauma or just stress, I mean, stress is a kind of trauma.
It's a pillar.
You can find rescue remedy at your average drugstore, pharmacy, health food store. It is so widespread. You can get these little bottles. They make sprays and lozenges and all sorts of other things. You can find something that fits your lifestyle. So that's number one.
And you have a ton of recipes in here too.
I do, absolutely. So if you're a maker yourself, if you want to kind of mix and match, I have my own version of a kind of witchy rescue remedy that uses more traditionally magical plants rather than the ones that we find that Dr. Batch used in his formula. But there are a handful of flowers that I think are really timely, given the kind of trauma that we're talking about, which disproportionately affects people with marginalized identities, including the BIPOC community, the queer community, the women and femme communities. So, some of those that I would consider as being really timely for those who are listening, who might want to have a kind of, see mental checklist, see if they kind of match for them. So one that I currently work with a lot, I mean, I have been for a long time, but I think is very, very timely for the state of the world, is Magnolia. And my favorite Magnolia is the one that grows practically in my backyard. It's the Southern Magnolia, the grandiflora variety, but the entire Magnolia family is exceedingly ancient, is deeply related, deeply attuned to the energies of the divine feminine. So when we have reproductive rights for people who can get pregnant being challenged by the Supreme Court, I think this is a really good essence because it has lived way longer than we can imagine, like hundreds of millions of years. So if we can take a deep breath and dig our roots down like it invites us to do, we can weather the changes just like it has. I mean, magnolias evolved before your standard pollinators did. They evolved before flies and bumblebees, and they were some of the earliest flowering plants to ever exist. So they have a very unique relationship to beetles, which are their pollinators of choice. So that could be a really good one. I know that the stuff happening in the world today is also affecting us on like an intergenerational level. And so the trauma coming to the surface is not just our personal trauma. That is valid, and your personal trauma is important. But I also recognize that like when shit happens, it triggers the stuff you've inherited. So one of my favorites for this is henbane. And henbane is a nightshade, and a lot of the nightshades have these kind of really deep karmic activities to them. Of course, the actual plant itself is dangerous to mishandle, we'll say. But as a flower essence, properly prepared, absolutely safe because you're not ingesting any henbane particles, only the energy of it. And this is one that can help us navigate trauma. When we look at the petals of the flower, the corolla of it, it's kind of like crisscrossed with these veins, this almost grid-like pattern that's almost like a city map. It helps you kind of find the path to get to the center of whatever that seed pattern is, whatever started this intergenerational trauma, this stuff that you've inherited, the karmic cycle that goes and goes and goes. And it can sometimes be enough to just know that you are seen and observed with stuff that's bigger than you, stuff that's bigger than now, something that's been going on for, I don't know, a few hundred years like we've got here in the US. So that can be really useful. And as a nightshade flower, it's also good for leaning into that perspective of like maybe the dark night of the soul. It helps us when the only way out is through. There's no, cute little exit door that we can stop through on the way and just stop the whole process. Like we just got to lean into it. And henbane can be useful for that. And another one that I've been doing a lot of work with that also deals with a lot of this kind of karmic and ancestral stuff is yew. So that's the genus Taxus. And yew is extraordinary. Some of the oldest still living organisms alive on the planet today are yew trees that are more than a millennium in age. But it's kind of a curious case because they're very difficult to date, because sometimes as they age, they rot from the inside out. And so they have these hollow trunks, and just the outer layer of it will still be alive. And their boughs are extremely heavy, the needles very densely packed. And so it contends with that by having really flexible wood. And it teaches us how to bend without breaking. And right now it feels like we don't have much choice. It's either bend or break. That's all you got right now. So you can help us find a way to do that and to hold the burden with grace, and to remind us that you don't have to be rigid. Like this stuff that you've been dealt, like learn when to put it down. Learn when to let things rot from the inside out and say, you know what, I'm going to make space. And through that spaciousness, the light can flow, the healing can take place. We can last into the future if we don't hold on to what is festering. And that's one of the gifts that the yew flower essence gives us. Although not technically being a flowering tree, it's a gymnosperm. It's not a true flower essence. We'll say a tree essence. And yew, again, another toxic plant, but sometimes it is the toxic plants that have the most hopeful medicines, because they're the allies we need in baneful times. When the world is toxic, we need something to fight fire with fire.
Mm. Mm. When you were describing henbane, the way that you described it had me thinking, how do these associations get made with these flowers? Is it through observation? Or are there ancient texts that talk about, how these flowers work and what their spirits are like?
All of the above. I guess it depends on how lucky we are, whether it's all of the above. So something like henbane has a really rich and ancient history. The ancient Egyptians used to brew it into beer. It was sacred to the goddess Hecate in ancient Greece and the surrounding territories through time. It's been known throughout many parts of the world, into Asia and Africa, and all throughout Europe. So this is something with a lot of widespread lore. But when we are flower essence practitioners, our job is not just to look at folklore and magical properties and go, okay, so I'm going to use it for all the same things we would in traditional magical herbalism. That's well and good. And it's something I do in this book, which kind of breaks the tradition of flower essence therapy. But the number one thing that we will do when making a flower essence is the art of observation. So, I mentioned earlier, the scientific method involves us collecting data. So if we are sitting down in true relationship with a plant, we want to take in the message it gives us in many ways. If we're like really spiritually and psychically attuned, we might have a conversation with that plant spirit. We might, if we're very lucky, have the properties of that essence dictated to us. We can just take notes and go, okay, great. I know exactly what periwinkle does because periwinkle plant told me. Most of us are not that lucky, though. So we take our clues from observing the gesture of the plant. Does it stand upright? Does it sprawl? Does it have tendrils that grab? Does it have spines? Is it fuzzy? Is it shiny? How many petals are in the flowers? Do the petals form a bell, a trumpet, a star? What colors, what textures? And there is a chapter in the book devoted to this. It's called Deciphering the Language of Flowers, and it looks at this kind of traditional doctrine of signatures, as it's called,
Yes.
Which was codified in maybe the Greek period. It has really been known to indigenous people all around the world, has been the foundation even of Western medicine for quite a long time, and continues to be one of the mainstays of traditional herbalism. So this chapter is going to draw from that perspective, but also draw from a more, we'll say, kind of metaphysically oriented interpretation to kind of give us ways to observe firsthand. It is wonderful when we can read something in a book, do it, and get the same results, but sometimes we sit down with a different henbane or a different magnolia or a different anything, and the personality of that plant is different to the person who wrote the book had. So by knowing how to interpret these signs, these signatures, we can get a lot of clues. And also part of the reason I wanted that chapter in the book is because there are only 100 flowers in my book, but there are like
Oh.
hundreds of thousands of flowers out there, maybe millions, probably millions. So I'd rather always teach someone how to think and let them have that firsthand experience than just give them a reference guide and say, just read the book and copy. That's never what I've been about. So it's definitely firsthand observation is the best thing we can do. And even after that, we've analyzed the signatures and symbolism of the plant. We've read about its folkloric uses. Maybe we've read about how it works in other systems of medicine as well. Then what we do is we actually take the essence. We observe the influence of the essence in real time. And because they work kind of like tuning forks, when we use an essence that isn't necessarily useful, the worst thing that happens in nearly all cases is absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so you're experimenting on yourself. So the safety part of it, so like no
right, yeah.
dinging or anything like that on flower essence.
We thankfully, this is not like chewing on leaves or gnawing on some bark, because we don't have that phytochemical that we're worried about. The way flower essences work is they flood our psyche with the beneficent virtues, what Dr. Batch used to call, he's the founder of modern flower essence therapy, the God-sent virtues, or the virtues sent by divine providence within those plants themselves. And in the presence of those vibrations, our imbalances melt as snow does in the sunshine. So if there's no imbalance that particular kind of sunshine will fix, then what's a little extra sun? No big deal. And I really love the analogy of a tuning fork, because a tuning fork doesn't fix the problem for you. It demonstrates the correct frequency, the correct pitch. So, if you're sitting there at your guitar or piano or viola, you can go, okay, well, I need to tighten or loosen this particular string to get it in harmony. But the tuning fork doesn't do that for you. You listen as it floods the system with those virtues. You hear the correct pitch and you go, yeah, I'm a little flat, aren't I? Okay, so let's tighten this up. And then we play the correct note on our own. And then life happens and it gets slack again and we have to tighten it. So we take flower essences repeatedly because we have that correct pitch demonstrated all the time. Like any instrumental ensemble is going to tune at the top of every single rehearsal, because it's never a once and done kind of thing. And real musicians in real time are constantly correcting pitch to make sure that things are, in sync. And that's what flower essences are doing. They're helping us become more ourselves than we've ever been by releasing the things that impede the expression of our true self, our true essence, our true nature.
Yes. So coming from a singer, I always felt that music kind of permeates everything, and there's this sort of dance between psychic awareness and intention and manifestation and expression and all that good stuff. It's almost as if you hear the music before you play the music. There's like this cycle that happens. And have you seen Umbrella Academy yet?
I haven't, no.
Oh my gosh. So there's the scene where, the power of this particular character is learning how to be controlled. And the person teaching that character how to control it uses the phrase, listen to your marigold. Because he calls that power the marigold. And it's kind of the way I look at it when it comes to music. It's like you're allowing the song to be heard and played through you, and then you express it. And I feel like these flowers are doing the same thing. When you were talking about sitting with them and sort of engaging the spirit of the flowers, and then taking them and engaging the spirit of the flowers in terms of how it reacts with your body, all of that is so, like you said earlier, shamanistic and indigenous and tribal in nature. Like, that's exactly what they did. There was a lot of experimentation, but not foolish experimentation. It was definitely experimentation where they first approached, it's like approaching a wild animal. You have to be slow and gentle. You have to earn its respect. And then you're given permission to taste it or to try it, and then you learn about it. And I think, like, when it comes to flowers, now this is definitely the question that I wanted to ask you. I know when it comes to herbalism and like definitely the chemical aspects of these herbs, lavender for one person might have a certain reaction that causes them to relax and sleep. lavender for another person might have a chemical reaction where it heightens them up. They might have an adverse or opposite reaction to that. But we're talking on a chemical basis. Do the flower essences do that as well? Or can you say that this flower definitely does this across the board? It's just a matter of the combination that you give to a specific person.
So when we read traditional flower essence literature, what we usually see most makers, most practitioners and teachers assert is that, here is the cause and effect. We take this essence when we have this sense of imbalance and it yields this state. And otherwise, if we're not in that imbalance, there's nothing for it to act on. So that makes
Mm.
it pretty cut and dry according to most flower essence makers. And I would also state that most of the really big flower essence producers, like the Batch Remedies, the Flower Essence Society, the Californian Remedies, and everything else, before they will release a new flower, before they will publish anything about it, they've done really intensive proving of it.
Mm.
Practitioners around the world have observed, reported, done case studies. I've participated in some of these with different flower essence makers. I've done this at Delta Gardens. I've done this with my own remedies that I produce out of, nature here in Florida. And we never really make a pronouncement about what an essence is going to do until we can observe it and we can collect a wide enough sample set. So thankfully that captures, I think, most of our outliers by doing that. And, I will say that maybe 1 out of 100 clients who receive flower essence therapy will have these kind of unusual experiences. There are some people who are just vibrationally so sensitive that even a really gentle therapy like flower essences can feel uncomfortable from time to time. Certain plants tend to feel, we'll say, a little bit more urgent than others. So like when we work with the baneful or the toxic plants as flower essences, even they can feel more pointed in their effects than something like a healing herb. So, if we were to combine or compare the effects of something like lavender, a member of the mint family, something that's long been hailed for its medicinal, gentle personality, let alone its physiological effects, but just on the personality side, it's a very warm and fuzzy kind of plant. We compare that to something like henbane or deadly nightshade like belladonna or mandrake. These are things that are maybe a little bit more in our face because the plant itself requires urgency, requires sensitivity, requires care, and even some of that translates in flower essence form. But I rarely run across it in a practical setting, but I do like to hold space for those people who are just a little bit more energetically sensitive.
Love it. So I have to ask, what are you said you just recently you're going to be putting out a new book, if you don't mind me asking? Did you say that before?
Well, I do have another book coming, but when I started writing Flower Essences from the Witch's Garden,
That's what it
I had
was.
just
Yes.
released the previous book, Crystal Basics. But
Yes.
Crystal Basics does have a companion volume coming out next spring. So it's a pocket encyclopedia, 450 crystals, and I'm probably less than 2 weeks away from getting the edited manuscript back from my editor. So that's going to start our manuscript review process, and I anticipate, because it's a pocket guide, that's going to go pretty darn quickly.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. Now with flower essences though, I've seen them where they have crystals inside the bottles and stuff. Now, is that common? And does that assist, disturb, should they be separated or can you combine?
I think flower essences are a really malleable modality. Different makers obviously have different perspectives. If we practice with the batch remedies, the 38 remedies created by the founder of modern flower essence therapy, it's just those 38, and people who follow that school never deviate. It's a very narrow kind of system, but it's also a complete system. So you don't need to augment it anyway, but you can if you like. And then there are other makers like the Alaskan Remedies. They have a line of flower essences, a line of gem elixirs or gem essences, and they also do something called environmental essences, where it's like the spirit of place condensed into the bottle. And any of their combination formulas are going to have a mixture of all three of those things in them. I myself have made plenty of gem elixirs and crystal essences over the years, and I will mix and match depending on the needs of myself or my client or the space that I'm working in. And there are even schools of thought where you'll do like a hybrid elixir where your bowl with your fresh spring water in it has gems at the bottom and fresh flowers floating at the top to make a kind of composite formula. That's something I haven't experimented a whole lot with, mostly because I enjoy the separate components because then I have more blending options. But there is a really magical kind of synergy that takes place between the plant realm and the mineral realm. Each one kind of supports and enriches the other.
Now, up to this point, we've been speaking about these flower essences in a very therapeutic way. And I'm curious to pick your brain on how these essences can be used in a magical way, whether it be through ritual or like, love spells, money spells, things like that. Because I'm pretty sure there are people in the audience that are like, how do I get results from this thing in my magic?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, number one, if we have a big hang up to whatever it is that we're trying to manifest in our life, there's probably a flower essence that represents the outcome we're trying to seek. We can take it therapeutically to augment the work we're doing because it's going to do the inner psychological work. It's not going to do it for us, but it will facilitate the inner psychological work, so we're less likely to get in our own way. So that's the most oblique way we can use them to augment our magical practice. Now, early on in my flower essence experimentation, I started to branch out with my occult herbalism. And I would notice like I really needed this one obscure botanical and I didn't have it, but I had an essence made from it or something really close. So I would sneak a couple drops into a candle dressing or into an incense preparation, not enough to drown it. Obviously, it's kind of antithetical to the nature of things you got to burn. But a little goes a long way to imprint it with that energy. And I would find that although flower essences provide a really subtle energy, it is also a really pervasive one and one that ties really well with other things. So I started adding essences to a lot of my other kind of ritual and magical workings. So if that's something that you're interested in, the book has a whole bunch of recipes and formulas for you. It's got some sample rituals and spells, magical baths, candle spells, formulas that you can take or diffuse in your space or do all sorts of fun things with, everything from protection to money to love to attuning to the sabbats, if that's the flavor of your practice. So there's something in there for everybody.
I'm telling you, this book needs to be in everyone's library. Speaking of which, those of you who are watching us live, please type in the state that you live in. Okay, so that we know you're here. All right, give us the state that you live in to tell us that you're here. And I'm going to have Nicholas either pick someone at random or maybe ask a question that we've talked about throughout this live that can pop quiz you, or maybe just pick his favorite state, whatever he wants. But one of you lucky viewers is definitely going to get a free copy of this book because, like I said, it needs to be in everyone's library. And I'll also be putting a link into the comments section for those of you who didn't win to definitely go and purchase it ASAP. All right. So in the meantime, while everyone is commenting their state, Nicholas, can you tell us, any upcoming classes or events or things that you might be up to that people can sign up for? How can people reach you, your website, all that good stuff?
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. So if you are looking to reach out and connect with me, I'm at the Luminous Pearl in most places, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I've got a whole lot of stuff coming up in the near future. So once a month, I do a free online Reiki share for people of all levels of expertise and experience, including none at all. So I got one of those coming up in a couple weeks. I do my mineral masterclass series once a month as well, where we pick a single stone and dive real deep. And that's always a really fun experience. So the stone for July is going to be fluorite. Which is a stone all about structure and discipline. And then Starting next week, I'm doing a 6-week course called Flower Essence Alchemy, and it is hosted by the College of Psychic Studies over in London. It's going to be virtual, so you can join from anywhere in the world.
I want to do that one, you guys.
That one is going to be super fun. I actually started dreaming up a course like this before the book even came out. So now it's time for me to put my money where my mouth is and get all the PowerPoints together. But
because seriously, that was my favorite chapter of the book, chapter 10, the alchemy. Oh my gosh, because I'm such a fan. So yeah, woo, that's gonna be good.
So yeah, and if anyone is interested in learning about the other events that I've got, other books that I've got out there, and stuff that's coming, find me on social media or visit my website, and you'll have access to all of that good stuff.
All right. Do you have I'm going to close it in about a minute, so make sure you get your state in here so that you are in the running to get a free copy. And the last question I'm going to give to Nicholas before he picks a winner is, do you have any advice or any last words that you have for our viewers on any of the things that we talked about, on maybe someone who's new who wants to, embark on this information, or even on just, the state of things, what we were talking about earlier in trauma? Do you have anything you want to kind of put out there as your last words for our live tonight?
So whether we work with flower essences or other tools or no tools at all, the world is a complicated space at best, and we're not really seeing the best of it right now. But one thing that I have learned from all the different realms of nature, the flowers, the stones, other humans, is that we're all in this together, and it is only through community that we are going to get out of this. So I am grateful to be able to spend some time in your virtual space with your community today, but I also want to make sure that others know that goes two ways. So y'all are in my community now, and if I can support you, just let me know.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So, Nicholas, who is going to go home and get a free copy of your book tonight?
Well, I'm gonna do the nepotistic thing. I see someone is here from Florida, so I'm gonna Carmencita Perez to be our winner, so we can send a copy on over to Florida.
Yay! Carmencita Perez, congratulations. You are going to be mailed a free copy of Flower Essences from the Witch's Garden, Plant Spirits in Magical Herbalism, by this wonderful, wonderful author that we spoke to tonight, Nicholas Pearson. Congratulations. Congratulations. And Nicholas, once again, thank you so much for coming on tonight, for dropping some wisdom for us. And I really, really hope that we get to talk again soon, because your book is amazing and I'm going to buy all of your other ones too.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you everyone who is showing up with us here in the live space. It's my pleasure to share with you all.
Thank you guys. Every Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, this is how we grow. Good night, everyone.